Well, Matt, greetings from New York. As you say, there are hundreds of protests going on all around the world today as young people, school children from Australia to Iceland come together to protest about what they're calling the crisis of their lifetime. Climate change, of course, and what they see is politicians' inability or unwillingness to do anything about it. The protest started here in Manhattan about an hour ago. It's the largest march, the central nervous system, if you like, of it, because it is led by one 16-year-old, Greta Thunberg, who incredibly just 1 year ago sat outside her parliament in Sweden alone and held a very simple plaque that said, "School strike for climate." Well, today she has single-handedly managed to galvanise millions of protesters all around the world. Here's what she told them earlier.
This could only be a fantasy. I would never have predicted or believed that this was going to happen someday, and so fast in only a few months.
Well, of course, all this is timed to coincide with the UN Climate Summit taking place here in New York next week, where world leaders will come together to discuss what more they can do urgently to curb those rising temperatures. Perhaps unsurprisingly, the US President Donald Trump has said he will not attend those climate talks. We know, after all, that he is a climate skeptic, to say the least. But one thing's for sure, the young people here say they will not give up. For more on the day's events around the world, let's go now to this report from our correspondent, Andy Davis.
On a hot September day, a warming planet dominates the agenda.
We are the generation that will save this planet.
One generation, the youngest, now leading others before it, demanding urgent action to curb carbon emissions, the so-called die-in stage to warn of what might happen otherwise. This was Bristol.
Yeah, it's our future, and if any of us choose to have children, we want them to live in a world with clean air and, not be underwater or, living with gas masks or whatever.
School children and students led the way, but many others joined in.
To demonstrate that older people are as concerned about these issues as younger people are.
The theme of a planet dangling by a thread didn't win universal approval.
I think they all ought to get back to school and learn, rather than mess about like this. This is inconvenient.
But on these streets today, such voices were drowned out.
What planet we live in is more important than a bit of traffic, My daughter's future is a lot more important, and we've got not much time left to save the planet, and we need to act now, We're all here to show the politicians, the people that are in charge of this country, that we care.
There are thousands here today, but hundreds of thousands, even millions, adding their voices elsewhere. And the scale of this global protest, especially the number of young people involved, gives you a clear indication of their growing sense of urgency when it comes to the issue of climate change. Some of the day's first global climate strike protests happened in Australia, where an estimated 300,000 gathered at more than 100 rallies. From Melbourne,
it seems that the only people standing on the wrong side of history on this issue is our government,
to Sydney.
This isn't a fringe movement, this isn't a greenie issue, this isn't a lefty issue, this is a human issue.
World leaders were vilified over their climate change credentials.
Climate action! Now!
In New Delhi and India, as elsewhere, Greta Thunberg, the Swedish teenager who inspired all this, was fated.
I don't think we can hope to have jobs or have a nice future when our existence on this earth is not guaranteed.
From India to Indonesia, the scale and reach of this protest surely unprecedented. This was the scene in Nairobi in Kenya.
Climate change is real and it's coming for us, and it doesn't matter who you are. Whether you are rich or poor, this thing is real.
They protested in Manila, in Bangkok.
We're skipping school because the teachers teach us how to work in the future. But if we don't do this, there'll be no future for us to work in.
And Hong Kong.
Mama!
Even in Kabul, in Afghanistan, they marched under the shadow of the gun. Their message, if war doesn't kill them, climate change will.
We are not sinking, we are fighting.
For those on the front line of rising sea levels in the Pacific Islands came some of the day's most poignant images. And in Germany and Berlin came the most shocking, the melting blocks of ice beneath the gallows, a striking symbol of protest. Europe's capital cities saw some of the biggest crowds take to the streets, echoing to calls for governments to address climate change with far greater urgency. Back in the UK, office workers joined students in the protest. 100,000 gathered in London, claimed organisers. One cabinet minister said he couldn't endorse children leaving school for this, but said their voices were being heard. The Labour leader called them an inspiration.
And to those who say that school students and college students should be in college today, I say thank you for being here, for teaching me and everybody else a lesson about the environment.
From Brighton to Belfast, Cambridge to Cardiff, the UK Student Climate Network claimed more than 200 events had been organised today to raise the alarm for the climate, they said. For world leaders heading to a UN climate summit next week, a hugely powerful message has been sent.
Well, earlier I spoke to the Energy Minister, Kwasi Kwarteng, and I began by asking him if the government should be more aggressive in its approach to climate change.
I think in terms of the legislation, we've legislated for a net zero carbon emissions target for 2050. And we're the first country, big country in the world to have set that target. People are looking to the UK for leadership. In that vein, we've been asked to host the UN climate change talks next year in Glasgow. So there are successes.
But when you're still opening coal mines, you're extending Heathrow, you've axed subsidies to solar installations and onshore wind farms, for example. How radical is the government really being to meet that target? You could go much further.
I think we could go a bit further in things like the rollout of electric vehicles. We've said by 2040 we want all new cars to be electric vehicles. I think there's room perhaps to accelerate that.
So there's a trade-off, isn't there, between, not wanting to damage the economy, but also looking after our planet?
Sure. You see, I don't see it in the way that you've done. You've said there's a trade-off. I think they can work together. I think the key phrase in this is clean growth. It's clean because we have renewables and we're not chucking out carbon into the atmosphere.
It's just having your cake and eating it, though, isn't it, to quote the Prime Minister?
But the interesting thing, if you actually look at the statistics of the last 30 years, since 1990, we've managed to reduce carbon emissions by 45%. That's nearly half. But in that time, the economy has grown by 2/3. So those facts show in themselves that you can have a strong economic growth policy and combine that with a very responsible approach to the environment.
But to get the radical change on the environment that people say is needed, people will feel it in the pocket.
Now, in the first instance, you're right, it can be costly. But what we've seen, certainly with offshore wind, is a massive fall in costs. It's incredible how the investment and the innovation has managed to reduce costs. So those costs have gone down something like 30% in 4 or 5 years.
What are you personally doing to reduce your carbon footprint to make your life greener?
Well, I haven't driven a car for many, many years. I try and
You've been driven, though, by a government car?
Occasionally, I use that. People will know that I use public transport a lot.
How did you get here today?
Today I was driven by a government car, and I think it was a hybrid vehicle. And we're trying to work, especially with Grant Shapps, the Secretary of State for Transport, to make sure that all government cars are either hybrid or EV. We're trying to lead the way on this.
Why didn't you walk here today or get the tube?
Well, I was actually in North London, about 20 miles away, and I was paying a visit to my mother, so it would have taken a very long time for me to walk into.
Well, that's the problem, isn't it? If you're wanting people to get out of their cars, public transport isn't quick enough.
Well, public transport is good. I think it's something, again, we can improve, and it's much more energy efficient in many ways than old-fashioned cars. So that's something that we're promoting, absolutely.
Do you admire Greta Thunberg for what she's done?
Look, she's a remarkable figure. I think she's done an extremely good work in terms of raising the profile of this issue.
So do you sympathise with kids skipping school?
No, I wouldn't. I'm a great believer in education. I think education, time spent at school, is absolutely crucial, not only for the country, but also for the individuals.
There's no good if the planet's going to burn when you grow up, is it?
I would never recommend anyone missing school. I don't think that's the right thing to do, but I'm very impressed by the energy and the enthusiasm the young people have shown on this subject.
We've been talking about the future of the planet. Let's talk about the future of the negotiations with the EU briefly. Judges decide next week on whether Boris Johnson's decision to prorogue Parliament was lawful or not. If they rule against the government, are we entering a whole new era here?
I think that there is a debate to be had about the role of the judiciary in politics, in constitutional matters. But I would say that our judges are absolutely impartial. They're expert. They will have learned decisions. And I think they will do that in a first-class and professional way.
So do you regret saying that many people believe judges are biased?
I don't regret saying anything. What I would say is that there is an important debate, which is happening already in this country, about the role of the judiciary in political constitutional matters.
Do you think Boris Johnson lied to the Queen? Do you think he is a liar?
I don't think he lied to the Queen. I think the prorogation was absolutely justified. Let's see what the judges say next week.
Kwasi Kwarteng, thank you very much.
Thank you.